各位好，欢迎收看新一期的后花园面对面。那么这一期呢，我们讨论的话题将会是即将推出的房产交易预扣税。那么坐在我身边的嘉宾呢，是来自马特利麦凯律师事务所的主任律师 Steven Lee。那么马特利麦凯律师事务所呢，主要是提供中大型房地产领域开发领域的一些法律咨询的服务。另外呢，这个律师事务所还会为在新西兰投资的海外的公司和个人提供法律咨询的服务。Welcome, Steven.
Thank you.
那么我们这期的节目呢，将会以英文来进行讨论。First of all, could you please introduce about the residential land withholding tax?
Yeah, sure. This is a new tax that has basically been implemented pursuant to the new government policy in 2015. It's basically a new tax that's for offshore RLWT persons, basically offshore residential land withholding tax persons that's acquired and is selling the property within 2 years.
Okay, so what time will this new tax come into effect?
Basically in a couple of weeks' time, on the 1st of July 2016. But here, there's actually two dates that you have to remember.
Okay.
The first date is the 1st of October 2015 because that's when the information gathering stage had started. What it meant was that if anyone was buying or selling property after the 1st of October 2015, they had to provide the ID number and other information, and basically the government had collected all of that information for assessing whether they have to pay taxes or not.
So that is October last year or this year?
October last year was when the information gathering stage had started, but the new tax starts of the 1st of July 2016.
Okay.
In around about 1.5 weeks' time.
Yeah. So what is the reason that the government have to implement this policy?
Intention of the government was to basically provide another mechanism for collecting taxes. Now, in the past, it's been very difficult, shall we say, that to collect taxes from people that were not residents here, that had no records here, that were basically buying and selling property all the time. What this mechanism does is that it forces the people that are handling the transaction to collect those taxes on behalf of those people that should be paying tax, but were not paying taxes. I think one thing that that we should emphasise, and that is that for a lot of these people, they should be paying taxes anyway. And the purpose of this is to make sure that they do.
So in this policy, so how much should the investors pay for the tax generally?
This is one of the issues in relation to this new tax policy. It's not an easy way of calculating on how much it should actually be, because there's three different formulas to calculate the tax. And it also depends on whether if it's a individual natural person that is paying the tax, or if it's a company or a trust. Now, of those three formula, the first is basically a tax rate that is multiplied by the change in the price. Basically, the change in the price as to when they purchased it to when they actually sell it. The second formula is 10% of the purchase price. And the third formula is trying to take into account that there is other people involved in the transaction as well. So when you sell a property and you collect money from the purchaser, the first other person that you need to pay is the bank. The second would be probably the council for rates. So the third formula basically says that how much is left over after the bank and the council has been paid. And how the law applies is that is the lesser amount, is the lowest amount from these three formula.
Okay. So regarding about the group of people which is infected by this tax, it could be complicated to just give an introduction, but can you give us a brief answer about that. So what type of people is defined as the offshore buyers?
Well, who's defined as an offshore buyer? Well, people that don't have permanent residence, people that are not New Zealand citizens. But then there's also a number of other questions to be asked as well, because sometimes it's offshore companies. Say, for example, if it's an American company or a Chinese company. There's also potentially trust. And then we'll be asking all sorts of questions as to maybe it's a trust that owns a company that owns the land.
Okay.
Or if maybe there is 3 shareholders and one shareholder is an offshore person and the other 2 are not. I think that I could probably go on for about 1 hour or so to explain this actual question, and that's why if this question was yet to ever to come up, is the first thing that should be done is to talk to the lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, for now, nobody can be sure that if they are affected or not.
Well, for certain natural people, you could say that is a bit more certain. But then there's also some exceptions as well. And for example, even if it's a New Zealand citizen that has been outside the country, then they could still be called an offshore person, even if they were a New Zealand citizen.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a New Zealand, or if it's someone with New Zealand permanent residence, the period is much shorter. They need to come back into the country regularly in order to be called basically someone that is not offshore.
Maybe this tax could be very influential to the housing market in the future. So what are the main impacts for that?
I think that as a lawyer, it's very important for us to follow the government's intentions when they first came out with this new tax. And their intention was to ensure that people that have been trading in property pay their taxes.
Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is that, well, this is likely to deter those property traders that have been buying and selling property that should be paying taxes, but is not.
Okay.
So if they were not to enter into the New Zealand market, then you could potentially say that it might help alleviate the massive increases in prices, especially with the Auckland housing market.
Okay.
But then again, we will be asking a number of other questions as well, because we would also be looking at all of those other genuine people that would be caught out by this, because this tax applies to everyone.
Yeah.
As long as they're offshore person and they can fit within the particular criteria, they could just be moving house because they're changing jobs. Or maybe they have an extra, they have children or something like that and they need to move.
Yeah.
So I think that for a lot of these people, they'll be looking at what is the actual extra cost to them to make that move. And after making that assessment, they will decide whether to move or not. So on the other side of the scale is a lot of people that would have otherwise moved for very good reasons, but they're not going to be selling their home. And if you look at how that would affect the market, it means that there's less supply.
Okay.
New Zealanders are very well known to go overseas to work.
Yeah.
And so maybe a lot of these people might not sell their homes when they go overseas to work anymore.
Will this mean that a great number of people will pay more for withholding the house in the future?
I think it's too early to say right now, because the intention of this new tax is to prevent a lot of aggressive, shall we say, people that should be paying taxes but is not, and is purely targeting at those people that are seen to speculate in the Auckland housing market.
Yeah.
But as with many laws, shall we say, it normally has more than one effect. And And I think that given the taxes is just going to be coming in soon,
Yeah.
is probably too hard to say now. But that is definitely the intention, is to help collect taxes from people that should be paying tax but is not.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
好的，那么以上呢，大概就是我们这期节目的全部内容了。感谢您的收看，同时呢，也感谢 Steven Lee 的光临。那么，如果您需要有什么意见和建议呢，可以通过屏幕上的方式与我们来取得联系。感谢您的收看，我们下期再见。